So let's welcome Martin on the mic. Over to you, Martin.
Hey there. Thank you everyone for allowing me to join you at your conference. I'm just going to get my screen going. All right. So it's late evening where you are. I'm coming to you from Toronto, Canada. It's actually close to the morning for me right now, but you've had your dinner, and I'm going to try and keep things as light as possible for you guys as we go through the rest of the session. Just sort of getting things set up on my end with regards to controls here. All right, so we're talking about modern management and how we can say yes to it. So, when I look back how, management evolved for myself, I got my first job in management in the late 90s. I kind of lucked into it. It was, I had applied for a new job, and I had a computer science background, and someone had quit that same week I'd started, and my role was switched on to a more of a leadership role, and I kind of found myself by accident leading people, taking responsibility. And so I learned from those around me, and I thought they knew what they were doing. And, that was the impression I got. And, I got a sense that it was this almost perpetual cycle from leaders and management around me where how do they learn to become managers themselves? How do they learn what they did as managers? And it turned out they kind of did the same thing I did. They got their first job at some point and they learned from those around you. And it was this perpetual cycle of viewing your environment and mimicking a lot of the practices around you. And so over time, we look at the decisions we're making, the conversations we're having, and they didn't seem to be matching a lot of the reality I was seeing in my environment. And if we were doing so well with all of our management practices, why were our results so often unpredictable? And so, if you look at personas that have been developed over, the last number of years coming out of the 20th century, we've got these caricatures, right? We have this exaggeration and negative perception of management to a large degree. And, apart from these being very funny and providing us with lots of entertainment, they're probably very wrong, right? And, my experience with leaders have been they're rarely sociopaths. They're generally hardworking. They're trying their best. And so it's not really the people in these roles. Maybe some of it is their behaviors. And they're perpetuating the behaviors they've seen around them from their leaders. And so, when we look at things like Kanban and other ways of adjusting behaviors in leadership, it's more so about, is there a new path? What's available to them? What tools exist? What can replace what they had seen around them for many, many years? So, I think that there's a lot of disservice to some degree about these caricatures on managers that we see, because, in many sense, having walked the shoe of a manager for a long time, I have a lot of empathy. There's lots to deal with, and there's lots of expectations in the role. So let's talk about how to change that. And this is a Kanban conference, so we're obviously going to be talking about Kanban and how that relates to management. And it's really a very, very large connection. So what's coming to fix management for knowledge work? There's been lots of attempts at a new way of working. So Deming in the 20th century did a lot of great work on manufacturing. And a lot of even what we do in Kanban is based on a lot of his work. among many others and from other disciplines as well. There's Agile, and Agile, to a large degree, wasn't interested in management. They mostly wanted to pretend it was wasn't there at all, or maybe something to be vilified. So I'm not sure what your LinkedIn feed looks like, but every month or two I get these pictures of this is what a leader is and this is what a manager is, and usually the manager is depicted as some sort of devil type character. And so here comes Kanban unlocking something very different. The practices and principles really enable a new way. So I don't know if any of you guys watch this show Stranger Things, but I like to think about this management world pre-Kanban as the upside down world. Everything is kind of there, but it doesn't seem to be quite right. And so modern management really has a very good shot of being enabled by the Kanban method. So let's explore that a little bit more. So modern management, 5 ways to say yes. I'm going to take you through 5 basic areas that you can add to your toolkit. 5 ways to say yes to a new way of working. It was a bigger number than 5, but we only have this time slot, a little bit less than an hour, so we're going to focus on these 5 for today. All right, so the first one is managing the work, not the workers. And for you guys in the Kanban world, you've probably heard this term before, so let's explore it in a little bit more depth. So this is a picture of a place of work from many years back, and I wanted to call out someone in this picture. This is a picture I took in a status update meeting, and on the very left is Hardeep. And she runs a department with over 30 people, and they all report directly into her. So she's doing all of their, ongoing management, their performance reviews, all that stuff. Over 30 people reporting to her. It sounds like a lot. I mean, I've had many people working directly for me, but not that large, right? 30 seems kind of unheard of. How would I get that done? But she gets good results. She enjoys great relationships with her team. She's respected in her organization. She's doing a lot of good things. So how does she do it? What is her secret? And the answer is actually in this photo somewhere. And you can kind of look at it and poke about, see if you can discover what the answer is. But I'm going to come back to this picture in a moment to reveal what her secret is. So first, let's talk about this predominant feeling amongst traditional management, where there is this high correlation between utilization, how much individual productivity we're getting, and that correlating to outcomes, or more precisely, business outcomes. So the question is this really true? Is it really true that the more utilization, the better our outcomes? We're kind of addicted to this concept of utilization. I had this manager. Well, actually, he was more than a manager in terms of their title, but someone I worked with, and they would literally pace hallways at the organization we worked at around 5 o'clock, checking to see if people were at their desks, fingers were on keyboards, typing away, and that felt good for them. That they saw that people were kind of working away, typing away. We must be making a lot of progress. We must be succeeding for our customers. We must be doing well as an organization. And so this concept of utility bringing, a link to actual business outcomes very much comes from the production of tangible goods. So you can make that link a lot more in a tangible goods business. So, we've invested in machines, we've got inventory, it's piling up. Let's make sure that we're cranking things at a high level so that we are producing as fast as we can get it out to a marketplace. But if utilization for knowledge work had that same correlation, why hasn't it solved the problem? We have a lot of management for many years, decades, focusing on utilization, and somehow that hasn't cracked the challenge of, okay, so we have a successful company and we are doing well and we're meeting our customers' needs. So why is that? And for the most part, I like to use this analogy of knowledge work being less like factory work and more like a rock band. The focus is not on the individual musicians, but on the song that they produce. So, the question you might have is, is the rock band better if everyone is maximizing their utilization of their instruments? So the guitarist is just going at maximum, just trying to crank as much music out, the vocalist, the drummer, everyone else. What if they were all playing a different song even? Does that produce the result that you want? Does that look like success? Does that look like a band that people would pay money to go see? And so if you were to look for analogy, knowledge work resembles more the rock band than it does the factory. So why are we using the predominantly factory-based thinking to deal with how we manage our work in our organizations? So let's go back to Hardeep. Her secret was on the screen all along, and there was a little, maybe you didn't see it because of the size of the picture here, but I zoomed it in for you, and there's a little bit of quote underneath her title slide of her presentation. And it says, these are the services we provide to our customers. And she goes on to talk about what they are. She's seeing the world differently. It's a lens of services and customers. Her focus was on that, not people's utilization, their individual productivity. So, I mean, does she ignore it? No, she doesn't ignore these things. Utilization is something she still pays attention to, but it's not the dominant thing. Her dominant thing is understanding how these services can be made as fit as possible for the customers that she's serving. So where did she spend her time? She spent her time building models to understand how work flowed. Where did it get stuck? And her job was about executing her ideas on how to resolve flow issues. She was, in essence, creating the conditions so that her team could be successful. So she built a lot of models, created Kanban boards. As a result, she is now a KCP. In case that was, you're wondering where she went to next. And she lived in a world where policies, visualization, and feedback loops became the currency of productivity, not utilization. And so the substance of that changes things. We're not asking 30 plus people, what are you up to? What are you doing today? What are you doing tomorrow? Having endless status meetings where that's the traditional setup. And obviously we want to, we may want to talk about things on a personal level and what everyone is going into, but that again is not the dominant thing that we're focusing on. We're focusing on what's preventing us from performing for our customers. Meetings are reduced, they're much more focused. And I would say the biggest thing that someone like Hardeep shared with me is the amount of emails significantly dropped. This picture on the bottom right about your Outlook calendar probably looks like a lot of Outlook calendars out there from management. It's full. Maybe we're actually even taking pride of how full it is. And I call that situation Outlook blue because Outlook has this default blue color when a time slot is busy. So the Outlook blue or Outlook blues, maybe a better way of saying it, kind of goes away. We're focusing on the right things. We have time to pursue the important stuff, and they're resolving all the other stuff that we used to spend a lot of time on. So saying yes to managing the work is really about understanding your business, who are your customers, and what products and services do we provide them. If that becomes the lens of our focus, it changes how we work. Having a 30+ team all directly reporting to you starts to become a feasible reality. And so I'm not saying go out and maximize the size of your team, but if you have this approach in place, you are much more likely to be successful. All right, let's go into another topic. Let's say yes to Mutants. And let's talk about what mutants are all about. So many years ago, I got a new boss, and I was asked by them to read this book and reflect on it. And the book was called 17 Indisputable Laws of Teamwork. And so, I was getting past the hubris of the title, and took it seriously. My new boss wanted me to read this book, and it had a couple of chapters that had me pausing. I found them a little bit unsettling. The titles were Bad Apples, and the other one was Weakest Links. And without going into too much detail, a lot of it was about removing these two groups from the organization. Who are your bad apples? Who are your weakest links? And there was a sense of finding those that did not fit in. They weren't as, they were maybe contrarian, or they had a different skill set than everyone else. And there was also some, good stuff in there about, looking for negative behavior. And while it's not good, it's not good to tolerate jerks in your organization, there was a danger that, my kind of alarms were going off. There was a danger to focus on conformity above all else. And, you may have heard terms like team player or don't rock the boat and things like that. This was a bit of a challenge because this organization I had been working at, they really needed some innovation. They were in the late stages of a cash cow business. This thing had gone way past its maturity, and they needed new avenues of revenue. They needed new markets, they needed new products, they needed new services. And so this thinking about making sure that there is a lot of uniformity in how we think was actually something that I saw as a bit of a danger sign. So if you think about, knowledge work, it's got uncertainty built into it, right? And if we are adopting approaches where conformity is very important, it has the effect of filtering out innovation. You need to experiment. And mutations, it turns out, these kind of lovely accidents, people that are different, approaches that are novel, they're a source of potential innovation. And you can look around in nature to see lots of examples. So evolution in nature relies on this type of experimentation through mutations over time. Those that are doing well stick around, and those that didn't quite perform aren't as well. They're not with us anymore. And so there's a lot of trial and error here, but it unlocks possibilities. So don't kill the mutants is kind of the big message here. And cultures are full of stories where, a saving mutant is rejected, and they usually have happy endings where, the mutant comes back and saves the day, and everyone's happy and is now accepted in the culture or the tribe or whatever the organization is. The reality is it's usually not like that. Usually the mutant is rejected and there is no happy ending. And so, you can pick your favorite stories. I really like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. So we had this odd reindeer with a shiny nose, and was ostracized, but it turned out they really needed that, and it really saved the day. And so this fear of mutants and their subsequent removal is a natural reaction. And if you are thinking about modern management practices, you need to be thinking about your access to diversity. A lack of a diversity really needs to be seen as a competitive disadvantage. The more options you have, the more diversity you have, the more possibilities that you unlock. So what are we going to do? How are we going to say yes to mutants? You save the mutants by making it safe. You establish the environment where different perspectives and ideas are possible. We are open to these perspectives. We experiment with some ideas, and some of them will work and some of them won't. And we also have to remember, it's not about tolerating poor behavior or jerks, but really about being honest about whether this is the pursuit of number 4 is so strong that we forego the first 3. They're not all going to be good, and so not all mutations expose us to success, but none at all exposes us to the inability to change, and survival over the long term is at stake. So if you're wondering where this quote, certainty of death and small chance of success, is coming from, it's actually from the Lord of the Rings movies. But it was this dwarf, he's like, on this direction is certainty of death, and this other direction is small chance of success. What are we waiting for? Let's just go, because that's certainly better. And that's really what mutations unlocks for you. You may not be successful, but removing them completely is basically your path for certainty of death. So something to really watch out for. All right, what are we going to say yes to next? We are going to say yes to evolutionary change. Let's talk about that a little bit more. So many years ago, I hired a very well-respected Agile coach, and he kind of convinced us that massive change was necessary and really encouraged us to take the plunge of a lot of change. And they drew this big curve on the board. They called it a J curve, sometimes referred to as a satire curve. And the idea here was that you're gonna jump off, make a whole bunch of change. Performance will drop, and you're going to get out of it. And that's the only path you have to really meaningful change. And it's going to be painful, but there's no really getting past that pain. And as long as you do Agile right, and you have these great communities of practice, and maybe it'll take you years, maybe even 15 years, you will do well, right? And so we kind of took the advice, and overnight we changed a lot of things. It was kind of like you leave Friday and you come Monday, and our processes had all changed, our reporting relationships changed, our titles were changing, the culture was to change as well, our tooling had to change. And so we took this plunge in the deep end of the J curve, and he said, just take the plunge, it's safe, there's a pool waiting for you there. And so we did. And it turns out the pool existed, but really in the backyard of the consultant. And they used the consulting money to build that pool, I'm sure. For us, we didn't see the sign. We didn't see the sign that there was a lot of risk with this plunge. We were kind of suckered in. It was painful chaos, resulted in a lot of poor business performance, resignations, broken relationships, both internally and with customers. So if this is a predominant model for change, what can we actually look at that's a little bit different, that deals with some of this? So we got to talk about why this was a problem. Generally, these big, fast changes, they don't stick. This was the experience we had. Failure did not lead to the willingness to pursue and the outcome and the new process and fortitude. What really happened was a lot of regression, all the pain, and then a lot of talk and wishing back for the good old days where it wasn't perfect, but we had better relationships internally in the organization, better relationships outside, because of all this market risk that was introduced with all this upheaval, and ultimately unhappy customers that may not have the patience to ride out a very large change and all the chaos that came along with it. So we got to get away from this low success rate, this regression, and the fact that we're not really being very pragmatic about what it'll take to actually pivot in an organization. So it's a bit of a reality check, and I like to categorize the fact that a big change needs to be looked at as this gap And there are really 4 major categories in that gap that you need to overcome in order to get to this new goal of a change organization. What is your technical maturity gap? So does your new goal require a certain know-how and technical mastery that is very distant from where you are today? What is the gap on practice maturity? Does it require certain practices that are much more mature than you have today? And how big of a gap is that? What about the gaps in your social culture, your identity and values, as well as the individual cultures of those who are in the organization and their identity and values? So the bigger this gap, the more risk you're taking on. And you need to give yourself time to address all 4 of these at a pace that the organization can actually sustain. So there will be gaps, but the question becomes, how big of a gap can you take on before this starts to look like very foolish risk? And so Kanban, introduces a very different perspective on this. And this is where evolutionary change comes in to the picture. Taking experiments and shifting a bit at a time. You get to experiment in relative safety. And so regression is still part of this reality, but rather than regressing back to your starting point, you may just regress away from a particular experiment, a particular change. This one didn't work, we'll try something else. Or we might build enough tolerance to just replace it with something else. And so, failing backwards and failing forwards now start to become a reality. But along with the attempts at the technical side, you're giving yourself a lot of time for these things to stick along the way, giving your organization the social as well as the capability sides a chance to keep up with the pace of the change. So yes, let's start saying yes to evolutionary change. We want, obviously we want our organization's performance to change, and obviously we'd love to have them change overnight. But this is a risk that is not worth taking. It has a very low success rate, so we need to start saying yes to evolutionary change. All right, let's talk about yet another thing. Let's say yes to balancing demand with capacity. So this is a picture of Christina. Everyone actually called her Chris. And many, many years ago, we were working on a very long project together. And it seemed like we had endless scope. And we were working, consistently long, endless hours into evenings, weekends. And it felt like it was going on forever. I was actually the program manager for this effort. And I took this picture of Chris when it was obvious we could no longer ignore how unsustainable the working conditions were. It's 4 a.m. We're just tired. And, we talk in Kanban about visualizing things. We use our board and our metrics to visualize things. This was visualizing on our faces, right? How exhausted we were. It was clear that we lacked balance. And it didn't feel like we had a lot of outs. We had all these unrealistic expectations that we had promised the marketplace, promised internally. And a lot of this was very irrefutable work that just kept on piling up, particularly as projects, if you've ever been on a long project, they tend to actually get even longer because there's lots of time for additional scope and things like that. So what is going on? How do we say yes to balance? So we need to look at the reality of organizations with steady customers. Any organization that is operating is going to have steady customers, a set of product and services. We need to understand the fact that the opportunities will always outstrip our capabilities. We could be working on all sorts of new features, new products. We could maybe be working on some more technical debt, opening up to more regions. The list of possibilities and opportunities is quite endless. And so it's growing and it's growing. And our capabilities, in contrast, are relatively finite. They may be growing as well, but certainly not at the same pace. And so we're dealing with these two very imbalanced forces. I kind of like to look at it from the perspective of these scales. So when we say balance, we're talking about this balance between demand and your capability or your capacity. And so there's this big volume problem, but also a change problem too on top of that. So not only is there a lot of demand, but there's also a lot of change. And how do we keep our capabilities continuously congruent? And so what are we going to do about this? So if we kind of look at the 20th century playbook on this, we do a whole bunch of things, like we overpromise, and sometimes we get lucky, but usually not. We may refuse some random work. We may be thinking about hiring more people, smarter people, or train them better. Surely these are things that will fix the problem, right? So, if only this was the thing that would work, just hire more people and, we can reduce that timeline like that. Now, all these tactics have something in common. They're really feeding the problem rather than addressing the imbalance. They aren't really sustainable over the long term. These are things that are just kind of servicing the problem, but rather than addressing it in a fundamental way. And so one of the beauties of Kanban is starting to look at this imbalance and kind of giving us labels. Hey, we have to really look at attacking this problem from both ends. On the demand side, we need to shape that and come up with all sorts of tools and techniques to do that. And on the delivery side, we need to improve our capability. And there's all sorts of ways we can go about doing that. So let's take a very quick look at these two sides. And so on the deliver capability side, many of the tools that Kanban brings forward is helping us manage delay. I mean, it's not just about delay, but it is so much about delay. It was interesting. It was so much about delay that we were having this chat, and my colleague Alexi was talking about let's not use the bottlenecks word too much. We actually haven't been using the word bottlenecks for a while, and the reason why is it was just it didn't really capture what the Kanban lens gave us in terms of delays. Bottlenecks just being one potential way of looking at it. And the analogy here was similar to how the Inuit, in the north of Canada have, 50 names for the word snow. So snow has, tons of different names, and it's very nuanced. And so, delay in the Kanban world is our version of snow. We have so many ways of describing it. So, we get this. So when we work on capability, we're getting this world of really understanding delays and really understanding ways to deal with it. Delays in our delivery process are typically the dominant source of why things take too long. It's not the effort, the complexity. It is the delay in the actual system that the work takes place in. And so if we solve that, what a magical thing, because it starts to unlock significantly untapped capacity. And I wanted to be really conservative with this 2x, but it's a much bigger number than 2. It unlocks so much capacity. You could think about it as, you're hiring a whole free workforce just by getting really good at delays. And, going back to the story of Hardeep, this was something that she started to become quite the master of. Looking at the other side of the balancing act, we're thinking about shaping demand. And this is where, the analogy for me is more like, a hospital emergency department, where they're doing a triage, and, we're looking at all the different patients and who needs to be cared right away and who can wait, and, what are we going to do about this and that. And so in knowledge work, we need to do a very similar thing. We need to understand what can wait and what cannot. What should we do? What shouldn't we do? And what are we committing to? And so if you think about these two things and then go back to how we can structure our Kanban boards, we actually have worlds where these two things are taking a very dominant role, right? And we've given them names. So if we look on the left of the commitment point, we are actually in the world of upstream Kanban. Shaping demand becomes much more the dominant activity that is taking place here. We're looking at things like market risk, we're looking at technical risk, should we, shouldn't we, what are the best options that we want to bring forward so that when we are replenishing and getting past that commitment point to actual delivery, that we have the best ones available to us. Now, when we look at the right side of the commitment point, this is where our delivery capabilities now dominate our focus, and we call this downstream Kanban. So really, if you think about a full organizational service-based Kanban board visualization with the upstream and the downstream portions connected, we're now creating this visual model of how we're dealing with that imbalance from both sides of the equation. So Kanban starts to bring us this beautiful new model, where we have this balance taking place. And so, I've been using Kanban, for many years now, both in practice before I became a consultant, and no more of these 4 a.m. we're dying, so tired moments. We're saying yes to balance, and we have a lot of the tools from the Kanban method to thank for that. All right, so let's go into the final category here. Saying yes to measuring for fitness. You've seen this dashboard before. Maybe not this one specifically, but something like this. You've probably seen it. Maybe you saw it at a conference. Maybe it was built into the software that you use or you just recently bought, or maybe you saw a post on LinkedIn, went to a webinar. Maybe you even inherited from the previous person who was in your role. And, I used to produce a lot of these. And, the question becomes, how valuable are they? And, there was this one time that one of my colleagues had come back from it was sort of kind of a mini conference where he got to meet another company that was regionally playing in the same area, but in a different product space, and came back with their dashboard, really excited, like, look at how great their dashboard is, and we should produce all these metrics too. And the initial thing we reacted was, yeah, great, we can produce this, we have the data for this, we have the data that let's build it. But someone in the back room says, well, why? How does this relate to us? And so we need to really think about, why do we capture metrics in the first place? They're really dominating two categories, right? That's really why we have metrics. Primarily to make decisions or drive towards something. And so if you look at the picture of the highway, this metric about where, how the distance between this sign and the next gas station allows us to make decision on, okay, so do we turn around because we don't have enough gas? Or, we check the fact we have more than enough fuel to meet that range, and we move forward. So high quality decision. Drive improvement, where are we towards some sort of goal? How do we visualize that this is an important goal that we have? So what are the goals? So what are the decisions we need to make? And so those goals, those decisions are going to be tied to some goals that we're driving for. And so really this goes back to requiring us to understand our business and the purposes of the customers that we serve. What is it that they are actually buying from us, using from us? What are we there to support? And if we can understand why people are choosing our organization, our particular products, our particular services, this starts to become known as understanding what our fitness is. What makes us fit for the purpose of those particular customers. And if we can get to that, now measurement starts to make a lot of sense. We can measure for that fitness. We are understanding things at a much more deeper level so that we can actually make those higher quality decisions. So, Kanban loves using lead time distributions as part of, our metrics. And yeah, they tell us about flow and things like that. but they may not tell us enough on their own without understanding fitness. And let's consider this lead time distribution I have here on the screen. Is it good? Is it bad? Maybe we could talk about, the tail and whether it's fat or not, and maybe we can talk about, how left shifted it is. These are all great things to talk about. And for a long time, I ran these service level review meetings for many years where we had, metrics come up with all these lead time histograms and run charts and CFDs, sort of out of context. And it was, we took it very seriously, and it was serious. But in a lot of retrospect, we were like thinking very comically, because there was a lot of this phenomena of hunting for insight in the data. So we're looking at a particular distribution. Is this good? Is it bad? Okay, maybe we need to look at that tail. But it wasn't really until we started to understand our fitness metrics that this became a bit of a game changer for us. So going back to this lead time histogram, is it good, is it bad? Well, are you in the pizza delivery business, or are you in the furniture delivery business? Furniture delivery could be not too bad. It's mostly within your 3-hour threshold of, delivering furniture within a particular amount of time. I'm not sure how it is globally, but in Canada, the furniture delivery companies usually say, here's a 3 or 4 hour window, be home during that time. We can come anytime during that period. On the other hand, generally 35 minutes is what people would expect for a pizza delivery, maybe 40, 45 on the outer edge. So now we understand that this is probably a fitter histogram for furniture delivery, but a terrible one when it comes to pizza delivery. Now we have context in our metrics. Now we can look at whether we need to actually improve a particular service or not. Where are things working, and where are things a little bit more challenging? So modern management, are we ready to say yes to it? It's not a comprehensive list, but these 5 will get you on your way. We say yes to managing the work, not the workers. Be like Hardeep. We say yes to the mutants. We save the mutants. We say yes to evolutionary change. We don't take on these big J curves and expose our organizations to inordinate amounts of risk. We balance demand with capacity, and we say yes to measuring for fitness. There is really no need to be this guy. We don't have to be this guy. We don't have to work for this guy, because the tools exist for a different way. Modern management is right there around us. The Kanban method has provided the tools to unlock it for us. It's really up to us to really take on active leadership, employ them in our organizations, help organizations out there adopt new ways of thinking about management. All right, and thank you. I'm ready to take whatever questions that may come up.
Thank you, Martin, and that was indeed an insightful session for all of us, and understand why we should say yes to modern management and don't run away from it, which we generally do. And yeah, we have got a couple of questions for you, Martin. So we have 10 minutes in hand, and I'll take up the questions accordingly. There's one question. Let's begin with that. It's about justifying evolutionary change. So the question is, how do you justify evolutionary change with leadership, which is already impressed with the disruptive change dictated by the scaled agile framework? So how do you manage in such situations?
Yeah. I mean, this is an interesting thing about evolutionary change. I mean, it's the pragmatic approach, but it doesn't have the razzle dazzle sparkle showmanship of it. So I mean, one bit of a reality is you need to understand the maturity of the leaders that you are actually talking to. So if you are talking to someone who is, I'm going to be here for a year or two, I want to create a big splash, put something on my resume and show how bold I was, you may not have a very good argument to pursue evolutionary change. On the other hand, if you are dealing with a leader that is invested in the organization, maybe it's even a family-run business and we've had it for generations. The conversation is about how do we deal with the risk in your organization? Do you want to be the person that killed this organization? Do you want to be that after generations in your family? Do you want to be the one that brought us to ruin? Right. So maybe that's a little bit highly emotional there. But along those lines of evolutionary change, it's not about this, hey, wouldn't it be nice, and let's be nice to people and let's not push too much on them. You need to be talking about it in terms of risk. How much can your organization tolerate? How much can your customers tolerate with the lack of performance introduced with these large changes? And so that amount of risk needs to be forefront. So it's a very logical conversation, and you can talk about that. And there's some emotional side with the high maturity leader who is interested in long-term success. But if someone is looking for sparkle and fireworks, and whether it's safe or anything else, it may not be something that you can really convince them, and maybe you have to wait.
Yeah, thank you, Martin, for your answer. There's another question by Pranay, and he's asking, how can we deal with the challenges before the commitment point, especially with the leader?
Well, okay, so before the commitment point, right? So, this is talking about providing all sorts of, new tools in the upstream world before you commit. And the reality in most organizations is they don't have explicit commitment, right? So it's implicit in a lot of organizations. It may be happening very far away without any connection to the capability side of your organization. So, a lot of people, they work in a place where, so we're building software or we're supporting something, and sales have just agreed to some feature set, and they actually did it 3 months ago, and then nobody ever told us, and now it's coming in as something we have to deliver in a little bit of time, maybe next month or in a couple of months. So this type of thing becomes a lot of people's starting point in organizations. And so what I would say that you need to still go back to that concept of evolutionary change, because you're not going to change that way of working overnight. It's not like you're going to go there and say, hey, you know what, get your act together, stop committing to things, and only commit to things when we're telling you we're ready, right? So a lot of times a pattern is, we're focusing on downstream optimization first, so our capability side, before we start to look at demand shipping too much. And so a lot of organizations will not have any kind of formal upstream Kanban for some time. That doesn't mean you can't still do a lot of wonders around the commitment point. So you're starting to introduce things like WIP limits, and it's starting to build some pressure where you have to actually make decisions around what you commit to and what you don't commit to. And so this, you don't even necessarily even have to start in Kanban system with WIP limits. So again, maybe from an evolutionary change standpoint, you don't even have WIP limits, but then you eventually start to introduce them and start to lower them. That starts to end up bringing a lot of pressure to the organization, where we're now saying, oh yeah, we're going to do your thing, but you have to wait, because we got so much capacity in your system, and a Kanban slot has not opened up, so we can't pull. And so what I find over time with upstream is it evolves to deal with that new reality much later on. So we've got a constraint delivery system. There is only so much things that we are now committing to, and all of a sudden the ability to decide which one will come now and later, like the triage example I gave you, starts to evolve as a necessity to deal with that scarcity, because in the past we never had to deal with it. We just ignored it. Everything was committed to. And so, you know, the real answer there is you're going to have to give evolutionary change its time. You may have lots of, you know, overcommitted work for some time, starting with your downstream, getting that visualized, then getting it constrained with WIP limits, introducing commitment point, and now creating pressure for higher quality decision making in the upstream part of your organization.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Martin. Um, Moving on to the next question. It's an interesting one. How do you change the already sold culture of overpromising marketing and sales from previous 6 decades, regardless of how evolutionary process engineering improvements we have experienced in our lean Kanban world?
Yeah, I mean, it was one of the 20th century tactics I had referred to earlier in my presentation. This over promising, and I really do want to tie it back to leadership maturity and the question of, how much failure can we tolerate? So it's an overpromise because, by definition, it's a promise that we didn't really have knowledge of the capability of delivering. It was a very low likelihood, and our challenge is to probably usually remember the successes where we lucked out, and deal with the failures as anomalies. Maybe we didn't work hard enough, and so it is a real challenge, right? How do we get to do that? I really think it's the same answer I'd given previously around evolving to it over time. Accepting it as something that will be part of the nature of your organization. We can't go in, and Kanban is not about, imposing mindsets on people, right? So you see this a lot in the Agile world where, like, okay, you need a new mindset, and, leadership needs to get this new mindset. And if only that was possible and pragmatic, right? You're not going to go in and, shame leadership into a new way or inspire them into a new way. So you need another path, right? This is kind of, the rocks and the water in Kanban around going around the rocks. You need to start in a very different path, because that ingrained change is going to have to happen over time. So I like to think about these mindset shifts as the outcome of changes in our practices over time, not something that we can just install. And so, going back to expanding on my previous answer, you are evolving your downstream. You're evolving you're becoming more mature on that practice, to the point where now we're looking at our commitment point much more seriously, and now we're evolving our upstream. The experiences we have in doing that allow us to adopt more maturity in our thinking, in our mindset. And that is an outcome that, we can help achieve by keeping at it and continuously evolving and, looking for the next bit of improvement. And that's the eventual thing. So think of that change in our thinking around commitment and upstream, not as something that you can convince people to stop doing, but rather an outcome of better and better practices being introduced. So we're introducing things. We're not asking people to stop doing certain things. We're introducing something better. And then they grow to love this better thing, and they stop talking about this old thing. And we can now go in and evolve the organization. But, it will take persistence and time.
Surely. Martin, we have 1 minute left, and we can probably briefly take this question to answer. Though this question has been asked a couple of times, but Mukesh wants to ask you, how do we reduce the resistance from the top leadership or middle management who are not aware, or who do not even understand Agile but still resist? So do you have any quick tip for that?
Yeah, so respect the resistance, I would say. And we also need to think about empathy and look at the organization as, hey, the fact that we're changing and having this conversation is a sign of success. You know, you could be looking at a 50-year-old company, 100-year-old company, or something that's been around for 5 or 10 years. They got to this point based on all their previous practices and ways of working. Not all of it is bad. And so going there from the lens of we're just going to go in and ask you to change everything, I don't think it's very respectful. I don't think it's necessarily very pragmatic as well. And so a lot of this is we need to respect it and we need to acknowledge it. And it was certainly brought a lot of success. And we need to not have too much hubris on our own side. We don't necessarily know yet what changes we need to make, right? And so we don't want to be in a situation where, you know, in trying to install some good, we throw out some even better good because we've just decided to make some changes. So going back to that, so we start with where we're at. That's one of the, you know, values we have in Kanban. And if where we're at is leadership with certain values, then we have to kind of respect that that's what's going to happen. And we're going to be evolving that. We're going to be giving them new tools, see if they stick. We're going to be introducing new tools throughout the organization. And, you know, a lot of this thing is, you know, with Kanban, you don't really need to do, you know, ask permission most times. Like, so, you know, I had these conversations with some leaders say, you know what, my organization doesn't really support Kanban, so I can't use it. I'm saying, well, you know, is anyone preventing you from putting a whiteboard up on the side of your desk? No, nobody's preventing you. Is there anyone preventing you from visualizing what's going on? No. Is there anyone preventing you from looking at what services you're part of? No, not really. Is anyone preventing you from meeting with, you know, your colleagues every certain amount of time to review what's going on, or even in the mornings to see what's operating? No, not really. Then you're already doing Kanban at this point, so just go do it. So maybe we don't have to worry so much about leadership and just start with Kanban.
Yeah, thanks for bringing a amazing point about respecting the resistance which we miss out at times. And some of the participants also are echoing with me when I say this. Andrea is one of the participants who said, when you mentioned about respecting the resistance, she said, I love what you said. So thank you for bringing such amazing perspectives. It was amazing to have you, Martin, for Kanban India 2020. And we look forward to learn more from you in the future as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.